I'm very pleased to welcome you at our very first Big Thinking lecture of 2012, 2013. I'm only a century behind, so it's okay. The goal of the Big Thinking series is to bring social science and humanities research about and for people to Parliament Hill, and to inform this discussion and decision that affect and improve the life of all Canadians. Dans ce contexte, c'est vraiment un grand plaisir de voir un grand nombre de députés et de sénateurs de tous les partis dans la Chambre ce matin. Et je voudrais aussi souligner la présence de quelques collègues du Conseil canadien de recherche en sciences humaines, une agence clé pour l'avancement et l'engagement du savoir au Canada. But today, this morning, I'm also very pleased that we have partnered with Canada's Foundation for Innovation. For those of you who don't know it, is a national treasure in transforming research and helping community to shape, improve the life of Canadians today and for our future. So it's my pleasure now to welcome Gilles Patry, President and CEO of CFI, to say a few words and to introduce our speaker this morning.
Merci infiniment, Jean-Marc. C'est avec grand plaisir que la Fondation canadienne pour l'innovation s'associe à cette causerie, voire grand. Cette causerie qui nous permettra aujourd'hui d'entendre le professeur Ken Coates, titulaire de la chaire de recherche du Canada sur l'innovation régionale. At the Canada Foundation for Innovation, we believe that research builds communities and that innovation has a positive impact on our lives as Canadians. For 15 years now, the Government of Canada has entrusted the CFI to make significant investments in Canada's research community. To date, the CFI has invested more than $5.6 billion, that is $12 billion worth of infrastructure, research tools, equipment, and facilities in universities, research hospitals, and colleges. We were obviously delighted a few months ago when we were awarded $500 million in the most recent federal budget to support the Foundation's core activities starting in 2014. Nous savons que les investissements en recherche et en innovation engendrent des retombées dans les collectivités partout au pays. And you may have noticed in front of you today our newsletter, Innovation Now, where we showcase our federal support for research and innovation and in building communities and helping strengthen Canada's economy. In fact, at the University of Calgary, for example, researchers are making brain research surgeries safer and saving valuable healthcare dollars. In Barrie, Ontario, the municipal government was able to save its taxpayers millions thanks to landfill technologies developed using CFI-funded facilities. Et à Rivière-du-Loup, la collaboration entre l'Université de Montréal et Permeates, la plus grande entreprise horticole canadienne, contribue au maintien de 800 emplois. There are hundreds of stories like these in communities right across the country. Through sustained and continued investments in research, the CFI envisions a Canada driven by innovation, where pride in research excellence is part of our national identity. This vision can only become a reality if it includes all of Canada's diverse regions and rural communities. Dr. Coates is the Canada Research Chair in Regional Innovation at the University of Saskatchewan. He's interested in this question of how Canada's rural and remote regions can benefit from the scientific and technological innovation shaping our communities, shaping the economy. I'm thrilled today to be introducing one of Canada's foremost historians and an expert in systems of innovation. Dr. Coates will speak for approximately 25 minutes, followed by questions and discussion. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Coates.
We'll hope that technology doesn't fail us. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's a great honor to be here in the Parliament buildings, to be in Ottawa, and particularly to have a chance to speak to this wonderful audience. And I hope that I can give you a few words in the 20 to 25 minutes I've been allocated. When I was given my invitation I printed it off for my daughter. My daughter is 11 years old, and you can imagine how wonderfully thrilled an 11-year-old was to discover that her father got to go to Ottawa. And she came back and she was really upset. And I said, well, why would you be upset? And she said, well, it's not very polite. I said, what do you mean very polite? She says, well, Dad, you're really large, but calling you a big thinker. So I took this very personally, this description. It might be back in a year and a half, and I'll be a lot smaller, I promise, if I go. It's interesting, Jill, to hear about the CFI program, which is one of Canada's absolutely hallmark achievements over the last 15 years, as you described. I was working with David Strangway a couple of years back, and you might have heard this story. When CFI received its first allocation, it got a check from the Government of Canada. What's really interesting was the check was actually made out for, I think, $1.5 billion, if I remember correctly, and it was sent in the regular mail. And the secretary was just opening the envelopes on her door and opened up this thing, and there was a check for was it $1.5 billion? It was 800, yeah. Oh, gee, it's a small, absolutely small one. What I'd like to talk about today is about what I think is one of the real challenges of the 21st century. And I'll try to provide a little context and sort of hopefully end up with some fairly optimistic notes about where we're going and what we can do collectively, because this is a collective challenge. The challenge, to put it in a very different way than you might have expected me to start, is the challenge is set by the rise of the cities. You probably all know now that more than half of the world's population is in cities. Cities are growing at an absolutely ferocious pace. Doesn't matter whether you're talking about Turkey or India or Pakistan. The cities are growing very rapidly. The flip side of growing cities is actually declining rural areas. Small towns emptying out, rural areas, small villages and communities. I've heard a couple of presentations at conferences where people were talking about the demise of village life. And they were talking about how only elderly people were there and the young people had left and opportunity was disappearing. And it sounded very familiar. We're used to that in Canada, in northern Canada, in rural areas. Saskatchewan, on one very fateful day a couple of years ago, closed down 92 communities, withdrew all government services from 92 communities in a single day. It's part of their budget sort of crisis at that time. But the papers I was listening to were about Sicily in Italy and about rural Japan. This is a global phenomenon. And the rise of the cities has basically presented a very, very serious challenge for all of us. And that's the context in which I'd like to sort of present my thoughts today. You know from listening, and in fact many of you make these kind of speeches, I've heard them from several of you over time, that we're facing a high-tech future. Everybody knows that innovation and new economy jobs are going to be absolutely crucial to our development as a nation and our emergence as a competitive society. We have lots of reports that talk about productivity and keyed-in competitiveness, about the need to invest in new technologies. We have some wonderful examples. I was very, very blessed to spend 5 years in Kitchener-Waterloo, working at the University of Waterloo in one of the most innovative ecosystems anywhere in the world. The high-tech environment there created around RIM and OpenText and many, many other companies. And whenever I travel now, people will actually say, well, tell us about what happened in Waterloo. You'll remember David Johnson, who has a different job. He wasn't very good at the president, so we found him something else to do. And the Governor General, and he used to give these wonderful talks all the time where he'd basically ask the question, what's in the water at Waterloo? And there's lots of answers about universities and technology and CFI investments and everything else. But in fact, the underlying principle of Waterloo was in fact the commitment of the people to the region and their city and their country. There's a point at which, if you're interested, we can talk about this, that one of the most important factors in any innovation economy in the world is a simple phenomenon of what's called the entrepreneurial nationalist. It is somebody who builds companies and stays in their home country. It is something we have in small supply in Canada that we need at a much larger level. So, building the national economy rests on high technology, on developing new companies, on developing new employment opportunities, and working in whatever way we can to create these kind of jobs that sort of are key to the future. But here's one of the challenges. What we're trying to do is what everybody else is trying to do. If you take the question of national innovation and type in the name of almost any country in the world, you will find that they have a national innovation strategy. We got a wonderful presentation one time from the Government of Canada about Canada's National Innovation Strategy. The previous day, I had printed off a copy of Botswana's National Innovation Strategy. They were almost point for point exactly the same. The same kind of investment, the same kind of commitment. We have a global race to innovate. Our competitors are all over the world. Israel has one of the most competitive, creative, entrepreneurial innovation economies anywhere. Finland, South Korea, Japan. But in countries that do not have a very strong innovation economy are trying to build them. So as we try to create in Canada, we are competing against the very best you can see anywhere. Now, it's hard to summarize what an innovation economy is all about, so I'll give you my very simple equation. I'm a humanist and a social scientist, proudly so. This is about as much math as you're ever going to get from me. But I think you can see it's a very, very simple concept. And you can see in the words here, speeches we've heard from every politician in the country at different times. You know, what do we need to compete? Advanced education. People usually define that as universities, but it should be universities and colleges. Advanced education. Basic research. Get the best minds thinking about the projects of the future, thinking about how to sort of develop new science, new technology, and what have you. You have to have commercialization. You have to take the ideas from the laboratory and bring them into sort of active and aggressive use. If you do that, the promise of the innovation equation is very simple. If you do that, you will create jobs because you've created new companies. You will create prosperity, and you will create competitiveness. That if you are innovative, if you are doing the first three things, you will actually move fairly quickly in the opposite direction. And guess what? We've done big parts of this, and we've done it extremely, extremely well. We have copied a model that has worked in many other places, but I don't think we ever really truly appreciate how successful we've been. Jill said I had to put Canada Foundation for Innovation first on here, so I did. Canada's made some impressive innovation commitments. We've done an extremely good job. The Canada Foundation for Innovation is a spectacular success story in many parts of the country, in every university, many colleges, hospitals, and what have you. The Canada Research Chairs, I am extremely proud that I was able to get what I think is an unbelievable opportunity, not a personal one, but in fact an opportunity to work with Canadians who care about the future of the country. I'm also proud of the fact my brother is a Canada Research Chair as well, which I think my mother doesn't understand it, but she thinks she's happy anyway. Tri-Council funding increasing very dramatically over the last 10 or 15 years. Specialized scientific equipment. This is the Acadian Light Source in a small town called Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. Canary, Genome Canada. There are many projects on the national, provincial, territorial levels that are actually showing that as a country we are truly and deeply committed. We have done well. Our university system has grown very, very rapidly. We have one of the highest university participation rates in the world. One of the things that people sort of underestimate is the fact that our scientists are, pound for pound, among the very best anywhere. A phrase my friend used to use, Jim Miller, another Canada Research Chair, used to say was that Canada punches well above its weight. Even with all the money we put in, we still do way better. Canadians get way more out of this. We have 23 universities in the top 500 in the world. And we're always disappointed, you know, how come only 23 and what about the rest of them and what have you? But if you think about that for a second, on a per capita basis, that's almost twice the number of top-ranked universities as the United States. They always talk about the best universities, the Harvards, the Stanfords. They are spectacular. You know, give any Canadian university a $36 billion endowment and they'll do really well also. But if you go down the system, you will see that pound for pound, we have 23 universities in the top 500. Japan has 25. Japan's population is almost 4 times Canada. Right? We do really well. We have delivered at the university level and at the government level in ways that are quite fascinating. But in Canada as elsewhere, innovation has very much become an urban phenomenon. Our largest universities are in the cities. Our large companies tend to be in the cities. We have a couple of exceptions. There aren't very many. Waterloo, Kitchener-Waterloo. Actually, it's kind of funny when you go to Toronto, people say that the GTA goes to Kitchener-Waterloo. We used to have a comment in Kitchener-Waterloo that Harold and Peter will know well, that it's 110 kilometers from Waterloo to downtown Toronto, and 1,100 kilometers from Toronto to Waterloo. But there are exceptions of places that sort of have worked against their place, have worked against sort of the geographical forces and have created some sort of new opportunities in some exciting areas. However, The vast majority of our CFI money, the vast majority of our Canada research shares, the vast majority of our innovation spending, our government support for technology and what have you, goes to large cities. So you end up with what may be an insurmountable advantage. Or is it? The question we're going to get to sort of as we go down. Kleber's law is a wonderful sort of law of biological principle that says that as things get bigger, they actually slow down. So the bigger the animal, the slower its heart rate goes. The smaller the animal, the faster its heart rate goes, right? Jeffrey West, a wonderful scholar, sort of took this idea and said, what happens for cities? And, cities don't seem to slow down very much. And in fact, he says that in terms of innovation, it's exactly the opposite way around. That the larger the city, the faster the rate of innovation. That if one city is 10 times larger than the other, it is 17 times more innovative. Patents, startup companies, university degrees, major investments, things of that sort. If a city is 50 times larger, it's 130 times more innovative. These are general terms. It's not applying to Canada or the United States specifically. And what you get is this superlinear scaling. I love phrases like that. Accelerated urban innovation. The fact that as the cities get faster, they attract more money, they attract more investment, they attract more resources, and because of that, they become more innovative. We end up with sort of the arguments advanced by Richard Florida and others about the creative city. That in fact, for Canada to be competitive, we have to sort of pour more of our resources into a smaller number of cities so that Toronto can compete not with Edmonton and Calgary, but so Toronto can compete with Tokyo and with Seoul, Korea. That in fact, scale is the only sort of opportunity we have for competitiveness. And when you see that on a national scale, you realize it's quite attractive. We do have to compete with these major urban conglomerations. We do have to be at the very highest level, competing with Londons and the Parises, competing with the Singapores and the Taipeis, if we want to compete globally on an ongoing basis. But when you hear this argument, from my point of view, I was raised in the Yukon, and the Yukon is where always will be home is for me. I find this really frightening, because what does this leave for rural and small town Canada? If in order to compete globally we have to pour our resources into the cities, what do we have left? So if you go back to the knowledge economy and think for a little while of what the promise was of the knowledge economy, and in this particular context I'm thinking mostly of the arrival of the internet and all the related things that developed in that regard. You'll remember the promise. Do you remember the telecommuting promise? You can live anywhere and work anywhere. It sounds absolutely wonderful. I was actually born in Banff, Alberta. Wouldn't it be great to live in Banff and get all your money from Toronto? I mean, that would be a great, wonderful lifestyle if you could actually sort of do that. And that was one of the promises, that technology will destroy distance, that technology will overcome all those geographical barriers. We can work where we want to work, live where we want to live, and get our money wherever the money happens to be, anywhere in the world. I met a fellow one time who was an interpreter in Tokyo, and for 10 years he lived in this little tiny apartment in Tokyo and served as an interpreter for Japanese companies. And then his wife finally said, we can't take this anymore. They're living in 400 square feet, and they've been there for a decade. So they sold out, and they only got $1.5 million for their house, and they returned to New Zealand. Well, at that time, $1.5 million would buy New Zealand. And so they moved back and had this wonderful house overlooking the ocean, all this kind of stuff. And guess what happened? Their company said, you don't have to live in Tokyo to work for us. I don't know why you stayed all this time. And so they lived in New Zealand, beautiful place, and worked in Japan. This was the promise. The other promise, Rail Thompson is a chocolate company in Stratford, Ontario. Sell globally. It doesn't matter where you are. Little tiny craft shops, little tiny sort of boutique manufacturers can work anywhere, and sell all around the world. It sounded really, really great. It hasn't worked out. In fact, the only significant growth of telecommuting is on people within an hour and a half of a major metropolitan area. So people live in Barrie and come into Toronto twice a week. They don't live in Moosonee and actually commute in that telecommuting sort of way. So what has actually happened with technology in rural and remote areas? Well, there have been some interesting developments, but perhaps they're a bit mixed. Education. You can get, in small remote communities, can get really first-class high school courses in physics and chemistry and what have you online. There are whole degree programs you can get anywhere. E-health. This is only at the very early stages, but come back in 10 years, and e-health will revolutionize the Canadian healthcare sector, in large part because of the research being done at Canadian universities. Entertainment, you can get radio programs, television programs, basically anything you want anywhere in the country. Shopping, Canadian Tire. You don't have to go to the Canadian Tire to go to the Canadian Tire. You can anywhere in the country. Kobo, wonderful, great Canadian success story now owned by the Japanese. But you could have access to anything you wanted to buy anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world, at home. This is a mixed blessing. At some point, some research that we haven't done in full yet, anecdotally we know this to be true, e-commerce is destroying small-town businesses, and particularly in the far north, where the local co-op store used to have to sell all the clothes and used to have to sell the food and things of that sort. Now, people in the community go online, order up what they want, and it gets mailed in. So e-commerce has been far from a mixed blessing in many of those particular communities. But innovation does work. And one of the things that I hope we'll just take from my very quick comments here is, in fact, that there are phenomenal developments underway in terms of innovation in rural and remote regions. Our resource sector is one of the most innovative and most technologically proficient in the world. If you want to look and see some of the most exciting technology around, and I'm always very sensitive to talk about this in this part of the country, go to Fort McMurray. We always think of Fort McMurray in fairly simplistic terms in terms of environmental change and what have you, and fair enough, we can have that discussion another time. If you go and look at Fort McMurray, you are looking at one of the largest sustained investments in technological innovation in Canadian history. Hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars going into bringing technology to those areas. Offshore exploration, Saskatchewan agriculture. Saskatchewan agriculture is incredibly technologically proficient. Almost every one of these machines is actually run off satellites now and GPS systems for putting down fertilizer and harvesting and things of that sort. And that really interesting little structure there is actually a diamond mine in the middle of the Northwest Territories. The innovation, the scientific research made possible to find diamonds and to get diamonds out in an ecologically sensitive way out of the Northwest Territories is actually a testament to environmental and technological success. However, the innovation is great in many levels. It's made us competitive. Innovation is one of the greatest job killers in Canada. If you take a look at the forest sector, for example, innovations in forestry and pulp and paper and sawmill operations have actually removed many low-skill, high-paying jobs from the Canadian economy with huge implications in rural and remote areas in the country. On a global scale, what's really interesting here is there has been way more innovation in rural and remote areas in places like Africa than in Canada. And if you want to get a wonderful book called Abundance, The Future is Better Than You Think, it's a really interesting way to get introduced to this idea. Basically, there's a group of billionaire philanthropists. You might have heard of a guy named Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and people like that. They are pouring literally hundreds of millions of dollars into innovation focused on the bottom billion. They are begging people for innovations that will change and affect positively more than 1 billion people. If you have a healthcare innovation, a water supply innovation, an information technology innovation that you think will affect 1 billion people, they want to know about it, and they will fund it. The fastest growing cell phone market in the world is in sub-Saharan Africa. This is not a joke. There are people who've never been into a bank that now do all their banking on their cell phone. And it's a wonderful innovation that is taking place. Uganda has this remarkable internet ecosystem that's taking off in some really interesting and dynamic ways. In northern Canada and in the northern parts of the wealthy countries, there's nothing comparable to this. Bill Gates is not that interested in what happens in Île-à-la-Crosse. Not because he's not a humanitarian, but because the numbers are too small. You're going to affect 10,000 people in northern Canada. You can affect 10 million people in Uganda or in Kenya or in Nigeria. So there is a huge innovation revolution going on that is actually focusing on South Asia and on Africa and places like that. Well, technology is going to help. This is where you sort of flash forward and say, where are things going to be 10 or 15 years from now? I'm sort of in the school of thought around the abundance idea, that book I just mentioned to you. There are amazing things going on. Most of these are developed in universities. Most of these ideas are actually being developed and implemented in rural and urban areas, and they're then being taken out into the smaller areas. Digital medicine, We are going to see some absolutely stunning changes happening there. If you haven't heard about 3D printing and 3D manufacturing, just Google it. Take a look at the last couple of Economist magazines. 3D manufacturing will absolutely transform the way we understand manufacturing in Canada. You will actually be in Illa Cross and you will have a machine that will manufacture more or less anything you want. Very interesting developments taking place. Massive online courses. Interesting thing for Canada to compete against this. Harvard and Stanford are putting in millions of dollars to put their courses online. New innovations in electrical power, nuclear power in particular, sanitation, water purification systems, wonderful innovations in food production. In northern Canada, there's a lot of research being done on greenhouses. How can you bring fresh food into northern areas by using greenhouses in some systematic ways? And we keep hoping for rural work and regional employment. Oh, it's interesting to use one really good example. The MasterCard Foundation, which many of you will know is actually based in Toronto, has its offices in Toronto, is working on a really interesting international project where they are essentially creating digital jobs in the middle of Africa and mostly across Africa for people in these really remote communities, and it's actually working really well. So how do you build a knowledge-based economy in rural and remote regions? The answer is that there's two approaches. One is the standard approach that takes a long time. The other one is a sort of, I think, more revolutionary, and I'll talk about that very, very quickly. Obviously, education, skills, and training. These are the kind of things we often talk about. You empower people. Technological infrastructure, we have to expand Canary. Canary continues to expand very, very quickly. Not quickly enough for people who aren't connected to the system. We need far better entrepreneurship and more awareness of global opportunities in Canada. In the Yukon, they talk about something called lone eagles. And lone eagles are individuals who just basically decide to live in Whitehorse because it's one of the most amazing, wonderful, creative, beautiful places on the planet, and then work from there. So they might be an engineer, but they just choose to live in Whitehorse. But right now, they have a bunch of lone eagles. These people haven't even really talked to each other. They just operate by themselves. How do you go from lone eagles to a localized ecosystem? How do you create a small-scale Waterloo in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan? Or in Grand Prairie, Alberta, and things of that sort. Capitalize on local industries and economies, and find some boldness, which is not a fairly strong Canadian characteristic. But there are new opportunities that I want to sort of just leave with you to sort of ponder and maybe talk about later on. I think we need a national technical collaboration. I should point out by saying here, one thing we don't, I shouldn't say this with Jill looking at me and all my colleagues from Shirk and Humanities here, we don't really need a lot more money. Money's not the issue here. I think we can always take it. If you want to give me more money, we'll use it effectively. Canadian universities do very, very well in that regard. But the issue here is one of perspective. We need a national technical collaboration. We need to make it a national priority for our best scientists and our best social scientists working together to figure out what will work in rural and remote parts of this country. Not work individually, but create a national commitment to this area. We need to bundle innovation. Right now, healthcare is innovating in that corner. Education is innovating over there. We've got people on energy over in that part of the world. We have to bring all of these together. In small towns and rural areas, you need to have bundled innovation. These things will build off each other. If you make a major investment in healthcare in small town Canada, you have revolutionized the foundation for education and business. But if you only talk about it as a healthcare initiative, you're going to lose about 85% of the benefits from that kind of innovation. We need to create what I call here creating a rural and remote city. These areas are very small, but in fact there's a huge commonality of interests. My favorite example here is there's about 1.5 million people living in the subarctic. And I'm not sure remember as a part of it how often as a group that group gets together. People from northern British Columbia, from the Yukon, from Labrador, do you get together and talk about the possibilities and problems that you have? We can create, using technology, a rural and remote city. We can reproduce the interactivity of the city using the magic of modern information communication system. We can make Canada a testbed for innovation based on rural and remote regions. We do rural well. And we should be the best in the world. Everybody should look to us. Right now, people look to Australia. Because Australia, because of Crocodile Dundee, is far more sort of emotionally committed to the rural and remote areas, even though they physically want to live in the big cities. The final one that I'll just say here quickly, we need to rediscover and promote rural and small town Canada. We have turned rural and remote into negative words. People don't want to live in rural areas. Go and talk to a graduating class from a medical school. How many of you are going to go work in Moosonee? Well, you bribe them. Huge bribes. rural and remote places for the right people are remarkable places to live. Many of you will have lived and maybe still do live in these kind of areas. They're remarkable places. We have no ideology of small town and rural Canada. Not since Stephen Leacock. Not since Sinclair Ross. Right? We don't talk about it in a positive way. We make it sound like, oh my God, you've been punished. You have to go. Read Sandra Batula's Perfection of the Morning. If you read a book like that and you think, oh yeah, there is something in rural areas that we really should celebrate a lot. My final thoughts, we have made impressive commitments. If you do not know if you do not know a lot about CFI, learn about CFI. It is a remarkable program. If you don't know what social science, humanities research is being done all across Canada on rural and remote regions, ask about it. Because there's some absolutely dynamic stuff being done. The governments at the federal and provincial level they've paid at the house. They've paid at the office. Business investment is lagging way behind. Red Wilson talks about this, Tom Jenkins talks about this, we all talk about this, right? We haven't figured out a way to change it, but we talk about it. We have not had the business investment to match up with the government investment. We in Canada, and this is so ironic because we're such a multicultural nation, we do not pay anywhere near enough attention to what's going on in the rest of the world. If you haven't read Startup Nation, order Startup Nation and read what happens in Israel. Israel has changed itself in 20 years into the most innovation-based economy in the world. And they did so very deliberately through public policy. Not because just by happenstance. They did it with public policy. We don't know what's going on. If you did, you'd be really excited and worried about what's happening in Taiwan, what's going on in China. You'd be really impressed with what's going on in Finland and the investments going on in northern Norway. There's exciting things. We do need a concept, I would argue, of inclusive innovation. We are competing internationally, but we have to make sure that innovation serves our national objectives. And let me finish with this last one, because in many ways this is one that's most important to me. We need to put the national back in national innovation. Innovation is not about Ken Coates doing research that's good for Ken Coates' career. It is not about the University of Waterloo doing really good research that makes Waterloo even more famous as an institution. We, as public servants, in our own way, through universities, as researchers, as academics, and as government officials, politicians, our first commitment is to Canada. And we are competing globally with a bunch of countries that have put the nation first. That they basically see that their purpose of their innovation economy is to make their country stronger, more competitive, more prosperous. We have atomized this in Canada down to the individual institution, the individual researcher, or the individual country. We need innovation loyalty. We do not have it. If we get the right set of agendas, the right set of enthusiasm, if we actually do the one thing we're not very good at in Canada, and that's show passion, if we show passion around our innovation and create an innovation nation, we can actually lead the world and make rural and remote Canada one of the most dynamic places on the planet. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ken, for your passion and thoughtful insight about how we can rethink innovation in northern and remote and rural communities across the country. I know there'll be several questions, but before we do so, I would like to invite Michael Chong, MP from Wellington-Alton Hills, to say a few words and to present Ken with a small token of our appreciation. It's thanks to Michael that the Canadian Federation for Humanities and Social Science is able to hold these breakfasts here in a beautiful parliamentary restaurant.
Merci. Bienvenue à tous. Vous avez nous donné un très intéressant discours ce matin. Thank you for giving us a very interesting speech this morning. Once again, an excellent speaker that the Social Sciences and Humanities Federation has given us. Your analysis of the innovation that's taking off in large cities and megapolises around the world and how that might apply to rural and remote areas of Canada gave us a lot of food for thought. So I want to thank everyone for coming out. I want to thank you, in particular, Ken, for giving us this very interesting talk and ideas that we can chew on for the rest of this day. So there's a little token of appreciation here from the Federation for coming this morning. Thank you very much.
Merci, Michael. Maintenant, nous allons ouvrir la période des questions. Nous allons terminer à 9h moins quart. Please use the microphone at the center of the room, and feel free to use either French or English. And please just introduce yourself and ask a brief question. Thank you. So who's going to get us started this morning? Can you come and use a mic, please? Because this is being podcast. So after if you want to go back to Ken's lecture or to tell other people how wonderful it was, it's going to be on the Federation website in a few days. So,
Morning, Ken. Luc Lalonde. Ken, very good talk. I'd like to bring up the concept of youth in rural areas. As you know, there's a huge leakage of young talent from these communities. Could you share your thoughts about your policy inputted?
There's a huge issue around young people, and part of it is just, again, the ideology of small-town life. I mean, if you people are raised with the idea that all exciting things happen in the cities, they'll go to the cities. And they should. I mean, a lot of young people go away and then they come back and what have you. Let me just tell you something that we don't talk about very often. If you go into northern communities, you'll find an increasing backlash against university recruiters. You think, well, why is that? Part of the reason, very simple reason, is that there's not very many young people who are graduating from high school in these small towns, particularly in Aboriginal communities. You have a graduation rate of somewhere around 25%. And so guess what happens to the 25% who graduate is they have university and college recruiters who come up and say, why don't you come down to a major city in the south and work with us? When they do, two things happen. About half of the kids who come out of northern communities and go to universities fail. We always like in our world to say, well, at least they had a chance to try. I grew up with kids who did that, and they may as well have branded a big F on their foreheads because that's what they carried with them for the rest of their lives. And they didn't fail because they weren't smart enough. They failed because they went from a town of 1,200 people to a city of 2.5 million people. And that transition is socially really, really hard. So a lot of the communities, also, by the way, when people come out of those northern communities, they don't go back. And so those communities end up losing the very talent that they're counting on to sort of build their economy and to be leaders in the future. So you end up with a lot of First Nation communities have their strongest, best trained, most capable people living in cities and having less talented, less well-trained people living in smaller towns. So I think universities, colleges have to work very differently than we have with Aboriginal communities in particular, with northern remote rural areas as well. But also we need to listen to them. Because young people are not connecting up with the world that we want them, that we have been prepared for them. And we're finding that on a national scale. So I think the question of how you get young people connected up with innovation is really, really critical. We had a great talk about that yesterday. And I think it's really important that we find mechanisms that get young people thinking about innovation. So I'll put an idea in front of you that I just wrote up last night after another conversation I had yesterday. We have a registered educational savings plan that is designed to get people into university and college. Almost all of the rhetoric around the RESPs is based on my kids are going to university. Not my kids are going to university or college. The rhetoric is about university. What if you took that program and made it so that not only could they go to university or college, they could use the money that they'd raised to actually start a business? If we have a shortcoming in Canada, we have one of the highest university participation rates in the world. If that was the key, we would actually be the world's most prosperous and competitive technologically developed country. We actually have an entrepreneurship gap. We haven't enough people who are trying to create new businesses and new opportunities. Let's think about public policy options that give young people the choices that they really want to take and that we need as a country. Thanks, great question.
I'll ask a question to get some ideas going. One of the things I've always been interested in, there doesn't seem to be a lot of research on, and you kind of touched on this in your analysis of the fact that innovation's taken off in larger cities, and the larger the cities get, the more the innovation seems to take off, is the interconnect between the built urban form, density, urban planning, and innovation and increases in productivity.
There actually has been a lot of research on that, not so much in Canada. It's really interesting. One of my other hats is I'm actually the president of the Japan Studies Association of Canada and spend a lot of time over there. Japan obsesses about exactly that point. How do you develop cities? Take a look, if you go online and just type in digital media city Seoul, Korea. This is an area where they're creating 25,000 jobs in one place, all devoted to digital media. There will be almost as many digital media jobs in one city on the suburb of Seoul. But it's also a residential complex and a business development complex. If you want to go even further, and you probably know about this already, is take a look at Malaysia. Their multifunction is sort of high technology corridor with their multimedia university and what have you. There are lots of places that are doing this. In Canada, not so much. But I will give you an example, the one that University of Waterloo is involved with, and that's the creation of the University of Waterloo campus in Stratford. This is a project where we got the idea of actually building a digital media campus that would be all new economy focused, but not in a major city. Stratford is 35,000 people. The city put in $10 million, gave 11 acres of land. The province of Ontario put a bunch of money in. The federal government put a bunch of money in. And the campus just opens up next week, right? But that's not the important part. The important part of this particular story is that for the last 2 years, the city of Stratford has been in the top 7 most innovative most innovative cities in the world because of their commitment to digital media. Nobody had heard of Stratford as a digital media place 5 or 6 years ago, right? So the city of Stratford has changed its urban planning to focus on the digital media environment and creating these kinds of innovation ecosystems. So there's 2 parts to the answer. One is that, right? The other part is take a look at how the cities are actually developing. They're fragmenting into ethnic enclaves, and they're fragmenting on basis of income. And so the kind of creative city that people are talking about is a luxury of the upper middle class. I'm really concerned about that. If you guys know Toronto better than I do, but if you take a look at the geography, the urban geography there, you are getting areas where there are minority populations who are getting poorer and poorer relative to the rest of the population, and the places where the creative city works are brilliant, and the rest of the people get to come in on the weekend and take a look. So I'm not convinced that the city should just be allowed to the cities by definition are great. You have to be intentional about creating a space that actually works. Great question.
Jean Crowder, Member of Parliament for Nanaimo, Cowichan on Vancouver Island, and I'm the Aboriginal Affairs Critic for the NDP. So I have a question around, part of what your presentation included was the fact that technology, internet access and whatnot in rural and remote areas is actually pretty critical. And the reality is in many, particularly in Aboriginal communities, First Nations reserves, there is no internet access that's reliable or consistent. And in fact, in not so rural and remote areas, I live in Duncan, 1 hour north of Victoria, and large parts of my riding do not have access to high-speed internet. So you get a kilometre off the highway, and you don't have high-speed internet access. So I wonder if you can comment on perhaps some potential solutions, but also the impact of that gap.
Yeah. The impact of the gap is terrific in the sense you have young people in cities who are working with sort of 1 gigabyte connections to their homes and have all the benefits of working with high-speed, high-technology sort of technologies. And then you have these people from these smaller communities who basically don't bother with cell phones and computers because they can't make it work if they wanted to. What is the impact of that? Well, my 11-year-old daughter can beat anybody in this room in terms of technology. She's an absolute genius at it, only because she's been exposed to it all the time. Young Aboriginal kids are completely out of the loop. When they get to university or college, they're technologically not anywhere near as proficient. Not again because of any lack of knowledge or intelligence on their part, just access. Are there solutions? Yeah, they cost a lot of money. But quite frankly, if you're going to build a country, you build a country where everybody has equality of access to the most important elements, whether it's healthcare, whether it's water, whether it's housing, whether it's education, all those kinds of things. Technology is now an essential element in all of that. There are interesting solutions. I'll use a really strange example from India, if I could, not one that we're going to transfer over here. But in India, it's really expensive, and people have no money. These are the people who live on $1 a day, that kind of income. And what they have is they have internet connections that are based on buses. And what happens is the buses go down and come by all these little villages, and every time a bus goes by, it does an internet dump into that community. So say you go in there and do your email, right? Your email sits there until the bus comes by. When the bus comes by, it uploads onto the back of the bus, not technology-wise, and it then sends your email out. But you might have to wait an hour. Oh, gee. Right? And so they're looking at situations like that and saying, well, what can we do? So just start thinking creatively. Think about what you do with drones. having drones providing internet coverage that, again, doesn't have to be full-on all the time. You can find other ways of dealing with it by having large servers in remote communities that sort of store up the material that comes along. My great concern is that we don't do anywhere near enough of that. And with many of our major technology suppliers in Canada, you know, it's not just Duncan. You can get off the main road in Saskatchewan. You get 100 yards off the main road, and your internet connection goes down. And as a country, quite frankly, we don't do very well. I was in rural Vietnam 2 years ago, and we were 5.5 hours away down a dirt road from Hanoi, and I had better internet connectivity than I get in Gatineau. And so we have to do it differently. We have to find our way to do that. If you don't, you may as well, it's basically a curse on Aboriginal communities in remote regions. So I think as a country, we have to solve that problem. It's not going to be easy. We have to deal with it fairly quickly. Thanks.
Good morning, Hélène Leblanc, MP for La Salle-et-Mar and industry critic for the official opposition. Thank you for a great talk. I think we need to have that talk more often because I think innovation rise from the challenges that there are in a country. And I think we invented, I always think of the skidoo, in order to move in snow and things like that. So there's a lot of innovation that rose from our geography, our demography, and also from all the different regions. Canada is a region. So I really appreciate that you bring forward this talk. And I think what my colleague raised is the infrastructure, is the internet access. And we need to be innovative on the way everybody will be at a level playing field. So as a policy point of view, what do you see the legislator would be bringing forward as policy that would make sure that there's no disparity between the different regions of Canada and there's not this competition where the rural and remote region compete with the urban region, and also how to raise with the challenge of the gridlock, let's say, in urban region also, and also the depletion of the rural. So in a policy point of view.
It's kind of interesting. You know, the short answer on policy is start talking differently. Policy is wonderful. It's really important to do that kind of stuff. But I think it's very important we become far more assertive about the value of remote regions and small towns. That those of us who represent these areas, that you just basically don't accept the idea that everything in Canada has to flow into urban areas. It doesn't mean negative about cities. Cities are marvelous. You know, Canada, by any strength of the imagination, you can take our top 4 or 5 cities in the country, and they're in the top 50 in the world. I mean, we have great cities, right? So it's not a criticism of the cities. We don't do anywhere near as well as small areas. So I'll give you an example. The best thing you can do, actually go and take a look at what the European Union did in terms of developing infrastructure in Portugal and Spain. We were visiting there this last year, and you know they overcame those barriers. They decided that as a whole continent that they were going to make sure they had the infrastructure in place so that smaller towns and remote regions would actually be competitive on the new economy. It takes a different kind of commitment, but the most important thing you can do is get it so people think positively about these areas. And if you get defensive all the time and say, well, you know, you can do okay in a small town, well, for some people, those small towns are exactly where they should live. There's no short answer beyond a major investment in the technology. It's not going to be there overnight. You have to actually lay the lines down. And it takes a lot of money. Canada is a huge, massive place. And so we shouldn't oversimplify that particular part of it. But I'll use an example of what you talked about, which I think is absolutely right, that your innovation flows best if it flows from who you are as a country. So guess what we're good at? We are one of the best countries in the world at natural resources. We are one of the best countries in the world at the second most important part of a resource economy, and that's our institutions. The institutions of law, the institutions of government, of regulation, right? We should be talking about those things in these kinds of areas as well. But my favorite example is winter. There are more books written on the history of winter in New England, than all the books written on the history of winter in Canada. Right? The number in Canada is 0, by the way. Right? Now, wouldn't you think that winter was a defining characteristic of this country? And shouldn't it be one of our major research things? I mean, I actually love winter. I think I'm from, I was mad when I got here yesterday. It was too hot, right? I think it's fall time. It's time for snow. And we should, as a country, embrace that, but embrace it as a research challenge, right? And if we start doing that, then all of a sudden we'll develop what are the next, the Bombardier. It's going to come out of that kind of relationship. When we pull into cities, we basically fight against winter. Right? And so, again, I'm not anti-city, but I think what we have to do is embrace those parts that actually make us unique, and it's scale, and it's distance, and it's nordicity, and it's winter, and it's cold weather. Let's start working on those ones as a national innovation challenge. Thanks.
Great talk, boy. I'd like to be able to just put your energy into a can, and release it when we need it. You eased into the talk of regulation. I think in this country, there is a great, people do not understand the critical role of regulation in triggering innovation. I'll give you a couple of examples. Just simply in the ability of rural and remote people to participate in decision-making processes. It used to be for big energy projects in my province, Alberta. Oh, by the way, I'm Linda Duncan, Member of Parliament from Edmonton, Strathcona. In my province, people in rural areas had to go into the library in Calgary, the Energy Board, and look at the application for the project. Now, the government requires that they post those online, and anybody can sign on and see all the documents, okay, and post their own comments and so forth. It's really transformed the right, it's put into effect the right to participate. Second example, I sat at negotiation tables for improved air emission standards for coal-fired power for 7 years. Prior to that process, which ended about 2004, there was no obligation to reduce mercury from coal-fired power plants. Okay, once in the end of the day, the agreement was that they had to control mercury to a certain point. All of a sudden, the money started channeling in the United States and Canada into let's come up with the most effective, cost-effective way to reduce mercury. Yeah. And I think that is certainly on a national scale where we can show leadership in both of those areas. Yeah.
It's really interesting. I am a huge fan of government and the political process and responsiveness. And give you two quick observations. Number one, if we're going to be competitive on a national and international scale, we have to do the regulations, but we have to do them faster. We drag things out. We are actually moving way too slowly in so many areas. And your colleagues in CFI and SHIRC and all that kind of stuff. Well, they're too polite to say this, so I perhaps will say it a bit on their behalf. The length of time it takes to make major decisions is way, way, way too long. We're competing against countries that have an advantage of smallness and uniformity over us. Singapore makes major decisions in a week that we can actually take 18 months to 2 years to make. You can't compete in that kind of environment. So regulation, sort of absolutely, but give some really careful thought amongst yourselves as to how you do this more efficiently with a view to the prize at the end, not just to sort of making sure the regulations get through. The second point is just go online when you get back to your offices today and type in E-Estonia. Estonia, if you haven't watched about the singing revolution, Estonia's transformation into a democratic nation is absolutely spectacular. They have decided that they are going to make the e-government their hallmark as a nation. They have done some absolutely astonishing things exactly along the lines you talk about. And it's interesting, e-government is not about putting PDFs on places where people can download them and read them. That's an important part of it. E-government is about participation, about making sure that you get full interactivity and full engagement. Take a look at Estonia, right? Realize that in Canada, one of our greatest strengths as a country is a phenomenon called federalism, and realize that one of our greatest weaknesses as a country is a concept called federalism. And that until we figure out how to make the strengths more or stronger and overcome some of the barriers on federalism, we're going to be really hamstrung in an ultra-competitive, fast-moving, unchanging or rapidly changing world. Take a look at Estonia. Get excited about what you can do and how you can transform the way we do government and administration in this country.
Last question, please.
Hi there. I'm Kathy Edwards from Carleton University. I was wondering what your thoughts are around the concept of leapfrogging technology. As I understand it, in India and other economies, they've been able to just leapfrog over the challenge of infrastructure. And I'm wondering what you think the roadblocks are as to why we can't take that approach in Canada, particularly in rural areas.
Yeah. A great question. Leapfrogging is really fascinating. The best example, and you probably know a lot about this, is watching what Malaysia has tried to do. And I put the emphasis on try. They put a huge amount of investment into the whole idea of sort of skipping the heavy industrial stage and going on to sort of the more refined manufacturing and the service economy. There have been some really big successes. Their approaches on e-government have been really successful, the national identity cards and things of that sort. And the most important part of leapfrogging is that you're not bound into a very traditional trajectory that goes, agriculture and resources into heavy industry, into light industry, into service economy, into sort of high-tech economies. We've got lots of examples of that working. My favorite, if you haven't been there, is Taiwan. Taiwan's transformation in the last 15 years has been absolutely mind-boggling. And they did exactly what you talked about. The government got together, government, industry, the university system said, we're not going to be competitive, we're going to be poor forever. And take a look at their scale. They've just leapt up on the scale in terms of per capita income. Those things are happening. It's actually happening now, most aggressively happening in sub-Saharan Africa. And not suggesting they're going to solve all their problems right away, but boy, they're making some really interesting jumps forward. Why is that not happening in Canada? Number one, actually because we keep seeing rural and remote areas as a problem. Basically, it's, I'm not living there. You don't want to live there, right? And again, I go back to the business of the messages we send to our doctors. We're going to bribe you to come and work in an absolutely beautiful, wonderful, dynamic little small town in the middle of an area where your income is going to carry 3 times as far as down in southern Ontario. So we're going to bribe you to get you to come to these places. It doesn't work. It's a wrong mentality. So you have that. Also, you do not have the educational foundation in northern and remote areas. There's another whole set of issues around here, but I'm going to use this platform for one really quick second. Until, as a country, we take fetal alcohol syndrome seriously as a national crisis, we're not going anywhere in the north. About 25 to 30% of all Native children born in northern Canada have fetal alcohol syndrome or fetal alcohol effects. They are essentially uneducatable, untrainable, and have very serious difficulty making a transition into the workforce if they're able to do so. They will cost a child who has serious fetal alcohol syndrome, cost you several $1 million a year in government funding, the healthcare system, the prison system, and educational supports. As a nation, we are doing next to nothing to solve that. And I don't mean individually, individual doctors in individual regions, but as a country, we haven't tackled that. I'll tell you, you can't leapfrog off that foundation. And so until we take those things seriously and work with First Nations communities to build the country in the future that they want, we're not going anywhere.
Thank you, Ken. This was an amazing, stimulating discussion. The question period is now over. We promise to end this at 8:45, but Ken's a few minutes before 9 o'clock if you want to have a one-on-one conversation with him. But that was a great way to kick off our series this year, and to reframe the debate and like this notion of abundance, that yes, we have scarcity, but we have all the elements to address our challenges as a country. So I would like all of you to join me to thank again Ken for this morning. Je voudrais également remercier encore une fois la Fondation canadienne pour l'innovation pour son support et son partenariat ce matin. And I invite you to our next Big Thinking lecture. There's a pamphlet on your table. The Big Thinking lecture is going to be on October 23rd, and it's got a slightly deviation. It's going to be lunch in the railway room, with the Canada Research Chair on Health, Law, and Policy. So check our website, fedcan.ca, for details, register, and I'll hope to see you there. So bonne journée à tous. Merci encore.